Okay, we're talking about child molestation. That's what we're talking about today. I promise not to get angry, and I promise I'll try not to swear. I often swear in these films, don't I? I often swear. I do. I often find myself swearing. Okay, now, in Australia here, Archbishop Wilson. He's recently been found guilty. I've got a mind map to help me talk, to help me clarify all my ideas. Archbishop Wilson, a Catholic priest he is, isn't he? One of the most highest in the Catholic Church. He's just been found guilty of, this is here in Australia, he's been found guilty of failing to report allegations of child sexual abuse. He was supposedly told of the abuse in 1981 and is just being prosecuted now, decades later. It's decades later and he's being prosecuted. So, he apparently turned a blind eye to child molestation, that is, sexual abuse. This brings us to the Pope, of course. The Pope turns a blind eye to the molestation of hundreds of Filipino male children each year. Hundreds of Filipino children each year are molested with a knife. They don't look as if they're enjoying it or as if they're really consenting. I call male genital mutilation sexual abuse. I'm just going off from Archbishop Wilson, who's been prosecuted, and moving on to the Pope. So you can see links, I'll leave links in the sidebar about Filipino boys, how they look reluctant and unhappy about being molested with a knife. I call having your penis sliced up with a knife child molestation. I call it sexual abuse. That's who I am, that's how I see things. I've been sexually abused with a knife when I was a child, when I was a newborn child, and I've still got holes in my penis, and I'm well over 60 years of age. No pope to date has ever defended genital integrity as a fundamental human right for male children, Catholic or otherwise. As I said, in the Philippines, Catholic boys, hundreds of them, are having their dicks chopped up, and they're not being defended by the Pope. The Pope is Catholic as far as I know. I think a lot of those boys are given a bag of sweets afterwards, they're given a bag of lollies. So, they're subjected to molestation with a knife, and then they're given a bag of lollies. Bag of lollies. Never take candy from a stranger. Never take candy from somebody with a knife who's coming for your genitals. Human rights, yes. I myself have I've informed the Australian Human Rights Commission and the President more than once that thousands of Australian male children are sexually assaulted with knives each year. Now, don't forget, this Archbishop Wilson, he was supposedly told that he's informed of abuse in 1981. He was informed. And action was taken years later, decades later. I myself have informed the Australian Human Rights Commission and President more than once that thousands of Australian male children are sexually assaulted with knives each year. They ignored the information of the sexual abuse. They ignored it. They ignored it basically. They didn't do anything. They didn't defend any child at all. Yes, Elizabeth Broderick, the former Sex Discrimination Commissioner, said protecting boys from molestation with a knife was not a priority. She told me it was not a priority. The present Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins, has listed her priorities. I think she's listed them on Facebook and Twitter, and as far as I can see, protecting boys from molestation with a knife is not one of her priorities either. They just won't protect boys. That goes back, that's just the Sex Discrimination Commissioners at the Australian Human Rights Commission. It goes back for decades, over 3 decades now. Not one Sex Discrimination Commissioner has ever seen fit to protect a boy. And they knew, they know and they knew that boys were being sexually molested, sexually assaulted, sexually abused with knives. They knew that and they chose to do nothing. They ignored the information of the sexual abuse. I have told them more than once, they still ignore it. The Commission has not taken a policy on boys being molested with knives. I told Edward Santow wrote to me when I complained to Rosalind Croucher, the president of the Australian Human Rights Commission. She got Edward Santow to reply, and he said the Commission has not taken a policy position, that is, the policy position on, as far as I'm concerned, on boys being molested with knives. They don't have a policy position on the boys being molested with knives. He didn't say boys being molested with knives. He used the euphemism circumcision, but he didn't mention all the other forms of of knife rape. Circumcision is only one. Castration is another. Subincision is another. Superincision is another. There's scarification. There's pearling and beading. There's tattooing. There's infibulation, there's piercing, there's a whole range of genital mutilations, sexual assaults that can be done on boys. Anyway, he says the Commission has not taken a policy position on genital mutilation. So, that brings me to the Children's Commissioner, Megan Mitchell. She has not uttered a word against the knife rape, the molestations, the sexual abuse of thousands of Australian boys. She knows about those abuses, but she has decided to turn a deaf ear, a blind eye, and keep mum about it. She ignores it, and she can ignore it because if you don't have a policy, you can ignore the genital mutilation of boys, the molestation of boys. She calls herself the champion of children's rights and the voice for children. Megan Mitchell is the champion of children's rights, self-proclaimed, and the voice for children. That's Mind Map 1. Okay, I just finished Mind Map 1, which was mainly about going from Archbishop Philip Wilson, who has been found guilty in a court of not defending children's rights. He was found guilty and he's being sentenced at the moment. I think he's appealing, but the fact is he was convicted in a court of failing to report allegations of child abuse, and I have gone from Archbishop Wilson to the Pope, who doesn't defend the genital integrity rights of, say, Filipino male children, who have their cocks sliced up in the hundreds every year, and they're Catholic children, by the way. And I have then gone on to the Human Rights Commission. Let's talk now about the Human Rights Commission in relation to the Archbishop Philip Wilson prosecution. The Human Rights Commission, they know it's against international law to genitally mutilate a boy. They know it's against the Convention on the Rights of the Child, to which Australia has ratified, or we are co-signatories, whatever terms you want to use it. They know that male genital mutilation is against international law. Several international human rights instruments. There's the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and there's another one too. I can't think of it just at the moment. They still will not defend boys from sex abuse with a knife. They will not. They should be called to account. I believe they should be called to account, perhaps taken to an international court or an Australian court. If it's good enough to prosecute Archbishop Philip Wilson on the strength of not defending several boys, surely it's good enough to start prosecuting, yes, it's surely good enough to start prosecuting all these human rights commissioners who for decades have done nothing. They knew, they were even informed by me, they were informed by me that thousands of Australian boys were having their dicks cut up, but they still chose to do and say nothing. Surely it's time that they were prosecuted, or at least made to account for, made to explain why they don't defend the genital integrity of rights when they were entrusted to protect those boys. President's Commissioner and Commissioners have indeed been informed of the sexual abuse, the male genital mutilation of thousands of Australian boys each year. I've informed them at least. These boys were non-consenting and underage. They have no policy, according to Mr. Edward Santow. Who decides the policy? Who else could it be except the Commissioner and the President? Who else is it? Who decides the policy? No policy means complaints can't be heard. They can't be heard and they won't be heard, will they? These human rights commissioners are entrusted with the care of Australia's children. But Broderick said nothing. Broderick said nothing, and Megan Mitchell said nothing when several boys in the Northern Territory were sitting in pools of their own circumcision blood near death. They had to be airlifted to Darwin for life-saving emergency treatment. Imagine what they would have said and done had little girl been pinpricked. They would have sprung to her defence, wouldn't they? But no, because these were boys sitting in pools of their own their own sexual organs had been sliced up, and they were sitting in pools of their own blood, weren't they? And no one was going to speak in the defence of children's rights. I have brought this particular incident to the notice of the Australian Human Rights Commission, but still they do and say nothing, except that they have no policy. If they have no policy, complaints can't be heard. Should now the Human Rights Commissioner and the Commissioners, the Children's Commissioner, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, the Human Rights Commissioner, and the President too, should they be prosecuted for failing to defend boys as their public servants at Australia's National Human Rights Institution? They are public servants, yes, the highest public servants in the land, aren't they? And they were entrusted to defend children, to speak up for children, to be the voice of children. Should they be prosecuted, and indeed should there be retroactive and retrospective legislation to prosecute them? Should they be? I mean, if this, what's his name, Archbishop Philip Wilson can be prosecuted for something that happened decades ago, thousands and thousands of Australian boys have had their penises sliced up. I was one of them. I was done in the 1950s. Oh, yes, where are we? If found guilty of ignoring the molestation, the sexual abuse of boys, yes, what sort of punishments should these commissioners have meted out to them? What punishment could fit their crime? Is it a crime to ignore the rights, the fundamental human rights of boys when you're a human rights discrimination commissioner? A human rights commissioner or a sex discrimination commissioner or a children's rights commissioner? If you are a children's rights commissioner, a human rights commissioner, and a sex discrimination commissioner, after all, sex discrimination commissioners are supposed to defend children of both genders, if you're found guilty of ignoring the molestation with a knife, the sexual abuse of boys with a knife, if you turned a blind for decades, well, I mean, what sort of punishment should be meted out to you? This Archbishop Wilson has maybe given home detention, or yes, it looks like he might be given home detention. I think he's appealing against that anyway. But no sex discrimination commissioner. This is a sex discrimination commissioner for the past three decades. For over 30 years, no sex discrimination commissioner has ever defended a male child's right to genital integrity, a fundamental human right. They wouldn't speak up for them. There was Bryce, what was her name? Quentin Bryce. She went on to become Governor General. She didn't speak up for genital integrity of male children. She was a sex discrimination commissioner. Thousands of boys were cut during her reign as sex discrimination commissioner. She didn't speak up for one or defend one boy, did she? There was Pooh Goward, wasn't there? Pooh Goward never gave a shit when boys were having their dicks cut up. She didn't. So, as Pooh Goward said, it's 21 years in New South Wales, up to 21 years in New South Wales. Here in New South Wales, where I am, you can get 21 years in jail for FGM. Pooh Goward didn't ever defend one male child. That's what I've got to say anyway. I've looked at my mind maps. I've said pretty much everything I wanted to say. Should human rights commissioners, should Megan Mitchell be prosecuted? Should she be? Let me know in the comments below. Should she be taken to an Australian court, an international court? After all, Australia has is where what's the word? We've ratified. We're part of the Treaty of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and other international human rights instruments. We're a co-signatory. Australia has ratified those treaties. It's the law that Australian children should be protected, that genital integrity is a fundamental human right, but the Human Rights Commissioners ignore it. Let me know what you think, if these people should be prosecuted and sent to jail. See ya.